Bam! What's up, folks? MC is in the house. My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chem, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I'm here every Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time, usually picking one topic, deep diving, sharing my thoughts on it, what's going on and stuff, and have a good time doing it. Derek, what's going on, brother? Good to see you. A little housekeeping. If you guys have not seen the links below, whether you're watching it on YouTube, one of my Facebook pages, or even, I think, Twitter, you can look at all the links that describe what it is that I do. I would say that the thing that's probably in your best interest in terms of priority is getting on my email list, and I will give you a program, a $47 program for free just for doing that. You can go to masterchem.com, find the opt-in there and do that, and you'll get a promo code. You can get my $47 Master the 24-Hour Cycle program free just for getting on my email list. If you just want the program, don't want to be on the list, sign up, get the promo code, unsubscribe, no harm, no foul. I have absolutely no problem with you doing that. I think you'll be better off for it, and it doesn't cost me anything to offer it. All right, so Jamie, what's going on? Officer involved popcorn. Okay, good. I'm glad I got some people paying attention. Alan, what's going on? Aaron, what's up? Felix, good to see you, brother man. Good to see you. All right. So let's jump right in. So a guilty pleasure that I have no problem admitting is my obsession, my current obsession with watching these First Amendment audit videos. And I will be honest, the first time I started watching these things, I should say the first time I became aware of this whole practice of First Amendment auditing. And it's like, that's a thing, right? First Amendment auditing. First time I saw that, I saw a lot of these guys that I just, and again, admittedly, wanted to dismiss. I wanted to dismiss as sort of like these, the Wall Street protesters, the Antifa type, people who just wanted to complain about everything. And, I'm very pro-American, and I mean that in the context of I am a devout believer in the power of the Constitution and the outcomes that it's created over the few hundred years that we've been a country. I've said before, you guys have heard me say, that the Constitution is the compromise, meaning individually, if we had to make up our minds as to how we thought society should be according to our own preferences, we would have, as many citizens there are in the U.S., we would have just as many ideas of how the society should be run, which is the power of the U.S. Constitution. These are sort of like the rules we've all agreed to play by. To draw a distinction between, just for the benefit of the context of the rest of the conversation, the difference between rights and entitlements. Rights or liberties are those things that we don't need anybody to participate in for us to have the ability to do it. Entitlements, however, would be things that we would receive from some other source that we've sort of been told or given the access to, or the ability to require or request at least. The difference is, again, rights we have. These are the things that we're born with. We don't need anybody to participate. Entitlements are things that we're given that at some point we think if they were not given to us, we would have, something owed to us. All right. So where the Constitution comes into play, and I don't know if, I don't consider myself a constitutional scholar by any means, but if you look at how the Constitution was formed and how it sort of brought us past the Articles of Confederation and sort of designed a government that made a little bit more sense, the Bill of Rights, which was made, I believe, a year or two after the Constitution, was pretty much, okay, if the Constitution is how the government's going to run, the Bill of Rights is, you know what, let's actually articulate all the things that we sort of implied with the Constitution, but aren't really detailed to the point where people are satisfied with it, right? Because one of the things that had to come out of the Constitutional Convention was that all these different states ratified or implemented, the conclusion that they came to. So all that being said, we have a Bill of Rights in America. And the Bill of Rights starts off with the First Amendment. And I think there were originally 10, right? So I don't know if they're originally 10. I think they were originally 10. But the first one is where a lot of the topic of today overlaps, and it's the First Amendment. And the First Amendment basically codifies the protection of certain rights, amongst them free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press. And these First Amendment auditors are people who I would describe as individuals who pressure test government workers, fellow citizens, and their ability to comply with the Constitution, or, as I mentioned before, the rules we're all sort of agreed to be living by. Now, in my, looking at the different videos, there seems to be two, maybe three types of First Amendment auditing content, right? There are the first type, which are the actual auditors. They're the people that go into government buildings. They go into basically areas where recording is anomalous, right? It is not normal. We have to understand and respect the distinction to be made between what is normal and what is legal in a mixed society like we have. There are going to be plenty of things that may very well be legal, but may not be normal in the way that they're being displayed or performed at a particular time. An individual walking into a post office, as an example, with a camera is not normal. However, it is legal. And again, if we are going to exist, according to, or coexist rather, according to these codified protection of rights, embedded in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, then even though something is abnormal, we still need to understand and respect and even advocate for an individual's right to, express their liberties, to exercise their rights, so to speak. So the first type are the people who actually do the thing. The second type I saw were these, and I'm just going by YouTube channels, right? Like that's basically the source of content that I've been using to build a relationship with this thing. The second type, right? So the first type are the auditors themselves, the people that actually go with their cameras into these things and they do their thing. The second type are the people who are observing or commenting on the job of the auditors. And these are individuals who not only critique or assess the efficacy or lack thereof of other auditors, but they also, some of the more prominent ones, tend to be sort of hubs where individuals who had some sort of tumultuous interaction with police and recorded it, they will actually give their content to this second type of content creator, and they will go over it to the benefit of not only the audience, but to expose the cops who may have been acting inappropriately in that video. So you have the auditors, that first type, then you have the observers, which is the second type. And I would say the third type with an asterisk are maybe people like me, people who are on the outside of this content creation ecosystem, who are just commenting on it as an observer, removed from the world of First Amendment auditing, right? So it's one of those situations where I think that that when you look at it for the first time, there's such a bias that we all have. And again, this is the normalcy bias. I don't know if it's called that, but it kind of makes sense, whereby we think things should be normal, right? We think things, let me say that more effectively. We expect things and somehow assign value, maybe even up to morality, on things based on the overlap that they have with what we expect to be normal behavior. If somebody is acting anomalously, then we have that sort of raised eyebrow, what's going on, and all of our curiosities, maybe even up to paranoias, start to be activated, because that's basically how we process danger, right? It kind of makes sense as from a natural point of view. It's like, yeah, if we're looking at a scene, in the woods, like I've gone hunting plenty of times, and if you're looking at a complicated landscape of woods, right, and being in the middle of the forest, and you see a color that doesn't match suddenly move, it is anomalous. That is where your attention is drawn, and that could be, an animal or something, and that's the way we deal with things. And it might not be hunting; it might be, observing potential threats and whatnot. Law enforcement are trained to pick up the anomalies, as they're surveying their patrol areas and whatnot. So the idea of us taking interest in something that is not normal makes sense. It's a natural reaction. So when I look at these individuals that put themselves in these situations, there is an expectation of that, on their part. They expect people to react. And you will find it, and I've watched many different auditors, and their content, and I've created, or I should say, I could summarize what I think is the best formula. A little bit of preference, obviously, and what I would consider to be a better way to go about it. But I think when you look at a lot of these auditors, you have a position whereby their energy is overlapped and offset with the energy of the people who are working against them, right? The antagonists. And it could be a security guard, a police officer, government employees. It could be fellow citizens. But usually the more viral or the more entertaining, videos that you'll see are the ones where there is a high level of conflict. And I think the more effective, formula that I've seen displayed are the ones where the auditor himself keeps himself at a level of sort of equilibrium. He keeps himself at this calm state because I think it draws more of a contrast, and we get to see just how inappropriate some of these other people are acting. I do think, although whereas I would say it is not necessary, when the auditors do not bring their energy down, they allow themselves to get excited too, I think the value of the video lessens, because there is going to be that subset of the viewership that is just going to start to side, with law enforcement, or with the old lady who's uncomfortable being videotaped, or whatever the case is. I think when an auditor himself presents himself as somebody who is not likable, or not a fellow citizen in that sense, right? When they start to conduct themselves in a way that the person cannot sort of identify with, the viewer cannot identify with, like how they're acting doesn't resonate with how this individual acts. When that's the case, I just think it is a lower value exercise, like, listen, if shit starts to pop off in a video, or cops are throwing people and guys are yelling, like, it might be a viral video, and there are people who monetize, this process, which I have no problem with, but it might make more sense for them to antagonize people to the point of more entertaining videos. But again, I'm not looking at it, my value system for these videos is not, that is not going by that criteria. My whole thing is, as an aside, I guess, as a sort of foundational, where am I, my take on this whole thing. I think that right now, society, and we could argue whether it's already happened or not. I will say it's more beneficial for me to conduct myself as if it is not too far gone yet. But I think we are in a process of watching individuals just give away and sort of give up on what American freedom is, and what the value of the Constitution is, and the society that it's created as a result of its power and significance. I think you have people who are giving up. You have people who have just, who are so detached from what their civil, maybe obligations should be in a functioning society like America's had for a few hundred years. Like, when you look at individuals who are no longer taught the Constitution, no longer taught civics, or maybe even the history of the United States for whatever reason. You look at there's a reason why my 4 kids are homeschooled. I've been talking about homeschooling for over 20 years, way before I ever had children, because I understood what it was like to come through the public school system, and how people are not being prepared for functional participation in society. Sure, it's a multivariate problem. You have immigration. A lot of people are brought here, and there is not that pressure to assimilate. So they are allowed functionally to maintain a lot of the offset that they have from American culture, and that starts to degrade our ability to interact with one another. I've said before in other videos, laws are sort of codified morality, and the purpose of laws is to really regulate the deviance of what a normal people's behavior is. So if we have what we consider to be the American identity, or let's just say American morality as defined by the Constitution, well, there are people who are going to fall on the extremes of them to the point where they're dysfunctional. And I would say legislation, laws, and whatnot are enacted to sort of curb those behaviors to allow them to be more functional. There are some people who will not steal because it is immoral. There are some people who will not steal because it's illegal, as an example. So I think when you look at society as it scales up, and again, we're creating a set of rules or codes that we're all going to agree to live by, it makes sense to codify those behaviors that a component of society may not just do naturally, right? I think when you look at, where the average, city, dweller is on these topics, people that grew up, I myself grew up in New York City in the Bronx, and like we weren't taught this shit. We weren't taught the identity of an American citizen in relation to their rights and what the Bill of Rights codified in terms of how we were able to conduct ourselves, as adults in society. Sure, there are applications that could not have entered the minds of the framers of the Constitution. Like, what do we do with video cameras, and what do we do with the internet and things like that? And, people will have debates on, and that's not really the purpose of this video. I always have my opinions, right? But it's not the purpose of this video. But when I look at an individual, or I should say the individuals that come into conflict with these auditors during these videos, I think it's very telling as to what we're facing as a country, the ignorance of what some of our rights are, the pushback of against an individual's rights because of emotional insecurities, or because just a detachment from the very existence of these rights, and some people, like in law enforcement specifically, the overwhelming majority of them at some point when getting on the job had to declare an oath to the U.S. Constitution. Well, that means something. And I think where there are still people who want to sort of dismiss these auditors as, troublemakers and losers, they got nothing better to do and stuff. It's like, well, your opinion's your opinion, but I will say when you're looking at the opinion of how even more conservative leaning, let's say 2A advocate type communities, how they actually think law enforcement is going to react to them standing up for their rights if the government should ever escalate some sort of conflict looking to oppress these rights. I think this is a great insight into what your average law enforcement officer may be working with. And again, I understand the limitations of, like, I am sure that there are auditors with successful channels that when they go into some sort of municipal building and everything goes perfectly and everybody respects their rights and nobody, even bats an eye at them, I'm sure that there are times where those videos don't make the channel, right? Because it might not be entertaining. I don't know that for certain, but I would assume that that's the case. But I will say, that notwithstanding, we look at all of the content that actually does exist, and it's disgusting on some level. It's disgusting to look at these people who are pushing back, and it's not only law enforcement, but individuals who work in these places, and you watch enough of them, you start to pick up the lingo, you start to pick up the, okay, so this is how this particular right, rears its head or has been interpreted, more recently. In terms of recording in a motor vehicles, I know that we have freedom of press, freedom of speech, but I don't know, necessarily inherently like how that falls or what that means to the act of recording in a motor vehicles, as an example. So a lot of these videos do a great job of really displaying, okay, these are the things, given the modern technologies or the modern capabilities of a citizen, these are the things that, you could still do according to your rights, by the Bill of Rights. And I think there's a lot of value in that. But aside from that, you will look at how there will be individuals who are so disconnected for whatever reasons. I gave some reasons earlier. Are they ignorant of it? Do they just not know what the Bill of Rights even is? Or do they not understand what they mean in actual practice? Or are they just, bad actors? Are they just people who just don't care what the value of the Constitution and the rights embedded in it mean to normal interaction among citizens? Whatever the case is, you look at these people, they are acting as if their individual, safety and well-being and peace of mind, their comfort, trumps any rights of other individuals. These are people who are willing to suppress the rights of another individual to accommodate the comfort level that they've become accustomed to. And that's the thing that is the most, I would say, nefarious, or the scariest thing, just using it, as a figure of speech. I think that's one of the things that's most telling about the deficiency of the average U.S. citizen. Let's talk about a couple of individuals. Let me say what's up to everybody. Cherrytown Vibe, what's up? Corey, what's up? Jesse, good to see you. Aaron says Jamie's obsessed with them too. Yeah, I get it. Johnny Groove, what's going on, brother, man? Stellan, good to see you, brother. All right. Joe Crustle in the house. What's up, brother, man? Brian, good to see you again. You're on Saxa, good to see you. Cherrytown Vibe says, only a loser knows nothing about the document that governs us. I am in full agreement. And I will call them a loser because, they will find themselves on the losing ends of a lot of things, right? So officer involved, who I'm assuming, is connected to this world, this ecosystem of First Amendment auditing rights. Case law dictates the majority of these rights in various places at various times. Two states can have completely different rights in the way they're expressed. These auditors exploit this. And I absolutely agree, obviously, and I appreciate you writing that out, saying it probably more succinctly than I would have. But I will say, when you look at these auditors, aside from, or in the process of exploiting these inconsistencies from state to state, it really starts to beg the question, why are these people allowed to have a different take on the most foundational, fundamental document that allows us, or that affords us, or protects our freedoms? Why is somebody allowed to have a different take on these constitutions? An example that you'll see in certain courthouses, you'll see these individual auditors go into courthouses, and some of them, they understand that, your right to press, free press does not extend into courtrooms, and that's up to the judge to sort of direct. And again, these are just assumptions that I make. These are assumptions that, okay, I guess it makes sense that the judge gets to determine whether or not recording is allowed, in their court proceedings based on witness testimony and, whatever the case is. Okay, I know enough on the surface level to be okay with somebody saying that a judge can determine whether or not video recording can happen in the courtroom. But then it enters into, and this is one of the points, the lack of logic that gets used with some of the other interpretations. So some of these municipalities will say, well, you can't record at all in the courthouse, not only the courtroom, but the courthouse. And, they'll have usually a sort of judge's order, or some sort of order or policy, even weaker, that'll make that distinction, because they might know that a lot of people will come in under the assumption that, well, you can't record in the courtroom, but the courthouse you can. So they'll add this little addendum to it to sort of cover what other people's rights are not, in that environment. And I would say, well, now I would beg the question, well, what is the logic of that, right? So I could understand why the framers would put in the freedom of speech, the freedom of press. I would also understand why, like when these security guards and law enforcement individuals, somebody who's identifying as an independent journalist, they're saying, well, show me your credentials. I understand why that is absolutely fucking retarded, like, oh, there should be some governing body controlled by the government that allows somebody to be a journalist. A little bit of a conflict of interest. Like, logically, I understand that, right? So logic will bridge a lot of these gaps, and that's where I question, are the people who are falling into such disfavor or into such conflict with these rights, are they just not logical enough? Do they not possess the processing power to bridge the gap logically, or which is the case as much the time, if not more, are they now just disregarding the relevance or the value of preserving these rights because of their own selfish reasons? I don't think an understanding of what these unprotected rights in a growing, more technologically evolving society, I don't think people understand the consequences of what happens when we lose the ability to do these things. And I would say, let me see a couple of guys commenting. I do like that you guys are participating, because I don't want to sit here and just give a lecture. I want to get some feedback, because, before I read this one comment, I find myself looking at a lot of these auditors and will readily admit that they may fall on complete opposite sides of other issues that I have, established, on my content, vigorously. Like, I saw a lot of these videos, like the Young Turks, right? That's one of these more left-leaning brands or news, media groups, organizations. Like, I disagree with them on a lot of things. I think they are being disingenuous. I think their preference is not compatible with the Constitution in a lot of ways. I don't know them as individuals, but they are on the opposite end of a lot of positions that I have. But I find them sharing a lot of these bits of content, where these police officers are acting completely inappropriately, up to criminally they're acting. And I understand, it's one of their talking points that defund police and anti-cop and obviously I want nothing to do with that more generalization type approach to, suddenly because we have a lot of bad cops, we shouldn't have policing in the country. Like, talk about baby with the bathwater. Like, that just doesn't make sense. But again, I find myself, which is why I'm so intrigued by this, I find myself on the opposite end of a lot of issues with these individuals who, where it comes to this First Amendment auditing, I am completely overlapped with, right? So I just think it's interesting. And I, so the point of that is, a lot of people that are going to follow me are going to look at this and go, well, wait a minute, fuck those guys. Those guys are, commies or lefties or Antifa or, just the losers, or like whatever I'm making stuff up. But whatever it is, I think this was significant enough to want to have a conversation about it, to want to do a show about it. Right. So Cherrytown Bob writes, I work for the court in an office full of liberal black men and emasculated men. I can't even talk to the guys about this shit. And, and this gets into sort of the multivariate dilemma, reality that we all live in, where, you look in the city, you look in minority families and such, and you look at not only the socioeconomic differences between them and the experience of a lot of the other country, but you also look at the removal of fathers and strong role models. There's a point where not having a father in a home created all of these issues, and those issues are still certainly, running rampant, but it's compounded by the fact that now, even when there are fathers in a lot of these homes, in these urban environments, or environments in general where there were not fathers, maybe a generation or two prior, you now have the men who are present, but now do not understand how to be a strong man, father, role model. So even when you have a father there or present, there is still a deficiency in the influence that individual has over, the children and the upbringing of what those children think in their preparation for society. So there are a lot of different variables here at play. Like, how do we get to the point where these videos, are so easily made? Why is this so rampant around the country? A bunch of different causes that, I would say would be one of them, right? Officer involved writes, furthermore, I need a little Monster. Furthermore, states have their own constitutions. They're allowed to be more or less restrictive in various ways. This is all fleshed out in court rulings. And yeah, and it makes sense. You have the Constitution as far as individuals' rights are concerned. Things that are not detailed in the Constitution, states are given the freedom to regulate and restrict according to their own governance, or their ability to govern themselves where that's concerned. And I think I wouldn't even want to comment on the preferences of an individual state. In a general sense, I would say the point of contention is when those states' constitutions now conflict with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. That, to me, it's obvious. I don't know if it's obvious to most people watching, but that is when there's a problem. When the Constitution says we have freedom of speech, and then a state somehow passes legislation to criminalize speech, and where is the distinction to be made? In a lot of these cases, when challenged, and this is a key point, when challenged, wind up making themselves their way up, to higher and higher level courts. Some of them, reaching as far as the U.S. Supreme Court. That's how these things get sort of set, or reset and resynced with what it should be. That's how you get, more contemporary or more up-to-date interpretations of what these things mean in a modern society. And I think that is what it's one of the great things that these auditors do, is they really, spotlight a lot of these inconsistencies and the sort of overstepping from a lot of these, might not even be at a state level, but sometimes municipalities. Some of these towns and cities across the country are small enough to where, everybody's so overlapped. The city or the local government can pass some restrictive laws that maybe even conflict with the Constitution, but may not ever really create a conflict in the way that the local people live their lives. And the homogenous nature of these smaller towns, allows these municipalities to get away with a lot, because they are acting as if they are not bound by what these federally mandated protection of rights, actually are. And I think, again, that's what the benefit of a lot of these auditors are bringing to light. Officer involved rights. The average person has an average understanding of what this all means, but they don't usually understand the case law concepts and how they manifest in reality. Auditors normally take advantage of it, I think you wrote. I don't know. So the point being, I would say that, for a lot of people, this gets complicated. Something as seemingly simple as a worker, you see this in a lot of these videos. You have a worker who is at a motor vehicles, and guy comes in with a camera, and they're saying, I don't want to be recorded. And they are not, never mind that they are like a government employee in a publicly accessible area. But the individual doing the record, but it's occurring in an actual public area. So never mind the fact that they work in this place that has these areas. When they're complaining, it is happening while these two individuals are in a public area. So it's a fundamental misunderstanding, or just a fundamental disregard of the logic of what expectations of privacy do you have in public. And they might say, they might be having a bad hair day, or whatever the case is, they don't want to be recorded, but the authority, with which they speak, as if they are somehow entitled to not being recorded when in public. And when you look at, okay, what would that look like in other applications? And, it doesn't take much to see how ridiculous that, what it is that they're asking. If that was actually true, that you could say that somebody can't record you, or that they need written permission before they could put you on one of their videos, just think about how much sort of regulation would need to happen as a result of that. You're walking down a block in New York City, people are, tourists are recording everywhere. What exactly would be the regulation? How would we enforce those restrictions? So even in an application sense, it's ridiculous, right? But I don't think you even need to get that, sort of creative with how we're looking at it to to realize just how ridiculous a request it actually is. So you'll have people that either don't know or they just don't care enough, and like you'll see some of these individuals getting removed from these government buildings. And, I will say COVID threw a wrench in a lot of this shit because a lot of government entities were able to get away with a lot of, a lot of removal of individuals' rights in certain scenarios under the umbrella of, we got to make sure everybody's safe and, like that whole bullshit. And I'm not going to get into all that, but, there are people who literally just don't care. Right. So let me get into some other areas here. MC, in regards to people having a different take on the First Amendment from state to state, you have to remember that the part that federalism plays in this. Well, like all that's fine. Let me see what this says. Okay, Joseph Pulitzer sued the government when they tried to say what he was doing wasn't journalism, and he won. So no, the government isn't allowed to decide what a journalist is, right? And again, that's case law. But again, there should be something to be said for the consistency of an individual's rights. When it is given, or when it is protected, and the protection is codified at a federal level, a state should not be able to interpret it in a way that is inconsistent with what maybe the highest level of interpretation would state, right? So, or would say, to be a little more clear. So, I understand that the states have individual freedoms to interpret a lot of these things. But again, this is why I think it's so important that these auditors are bringing this to light, because I do think that there are certain situations, because what winds up happening is, and this is just one, I'm not going to die on this hill, but just as an example, an individual is traveling through the country. I remember I was traveling, I was teaching at an event in Oklahoma, and I refused to wear a mask, so I didn't fly. So I drove from Pennsylvania to Oklahoma. And as I was going from state to state, the mask laws were different. So I can go into a convenience store in one state, and if I just drove past the other state lines and did the same thing, I could potentially be arrested for doing the same thing. And we understand that to some extent, a lot of this is up to the states, but not at the point where a state gets to infringe upon a federally protected right. Right. So one of the big, debates with abortion, Antonin Scalia, the late Supreme Court justice, his take was not that abortion should be illegal or that it should be legal or illegal, or like he had no definitive position on this. His position was the United States Constitution and Bill of Rights does not speak on the rights that are addressed when discussing abortion, which is why it should be pushed down to the states to decide. That was why he wanted Roe v. Wade overturned. It wasn't because, like I said, he just thinks abortion is a sin or a crime or like whatever the case is. He was just saying, well, the Constitution, Bill of Rights doesn't address this. So by default, then, and I don't know if that's the 10th Amendment, like the states are able to determine this. That's just how it goes. But again, that is not the case with anything that is codified in the protection in the Bill of Rights. Right, a state doesn't get to determine how it gives an individual freedom of speech. Like that should exist at a federal level. And again, this is just my logic speaking. I'm not, I make the joke. The only thing I'm married to is my wife. And I think another part of this is just having an open mind and being able to discuss it. Because at the end of it, we wind up with positions either we had no relationship with before, or we wind up positions that are strengthened by our ability to defend them, in the face of conflict. It's why these conversations are important. But one thing I will say as a sort of a general, eye in the sky, level of perspective, right now, the U.S. is in trouble when it comes to these topics. The average citizen has, I would say, next to zero idea of how, not only what their rights are individually, but how to sort of coexist with other individuals who also have those rights at the same time, as illustrated by the example I gave with like a DMV employee saying that an individual shouldn't, you're not allowed to record. I don't give you permission to record me. It's like, well, ma'am, he's allowed to do this. Well, I don't think it's right. Well, should we remove that amendment for you, ma'am? And like, I don't understand. I don't think she understands the gravity of the tantrums implications. It's just individuals just wanting to get their way. And I think, sure, that there will be that subset of society that, like, always. But I would say those people used to be deviants, which is why we had these codified things. The norm is no longer, I would say, the norm is quickly moving away from what is functionally capable of existing under the Constitution's guidance, right? Chop's Wild Ride. Give me one sec. All right. Chop's Wild Ride writes, I've always taken the approach to never attribute anything to incompetence that can be attributed to maliciousness. Doing the opposite only benefits bad actors. Right. And I agree. I think that I think where one would run into an issue is if the consequence would differ between whether or not intent was there. And I have no such, inconsistencies. So, if it's time for you to get the hammer, you get the hammer. Whether or not what you were doing was because you're an idiot or a bad actor. So, but I completely agree. Big Juan. So Juan, one of my old students who is obviously a law enforcement officer, also a budding actor. I keep seeing this motherfucker on more shows and stuff. I'm like, is this motherfucker a cop? But he's doing things on the entertainment front, which it's always good to see you guys succeeding. And I'm sure, I would love, some opinions shared here. All right. Oh, you wrote one. Hold on. Not only public workers, but also just the public at large. The public, regular, everyday citizens will call because someone in a public place is recording. Right. And you see that happen all the time. And I would say this, and obviously I know Juan. I've known Juan for a long time. So I'm not protecting him, nor am I attacking him. But just as an aside, there should also be, I would say, the onus starts to get put on the law enforcement agencies to be able to dismiss some of these things. And maybe they do, right? Maybe they do. And maybe, again, this is another factor amongst a slew of other factors. It's like, yeah, it's easy to say there should be more training when the budget's low or crime is, like, all these other factors. And I get that. I'm saying, just if we're creating a to-do list, one of them would be educating people who are receiving these calls to the point where they could say, well, ma'am, he's allowed to do that. Like, please don't call 911 because somebody's following the law, and I could see the slippery slope of the burden being put on law enforcement agencies to spend time and resources educating people. And that might not be the intent or the purpose of these outlets, right? The like 911, for example. But I would say if we're looking for a long-term, investment in a better way of going about things, it might be an investment that's worth it, rather than sending cops. Because I'm sure Juan has experienced this. It's like as soon as law enforcement shows up, everything starts to change. Sometimes people get nervous. Sometimes people they're so nervous around law enforcement that nervousness starts to be observable, and the law officers training, as I agree it should, starts to track that. Starts to see, okay, this guy's acting a little weird, a little jumpy. They get more on edge. Then you get to the situation where the law enforcement officer's like, okay, sir, I'm detaining you, and I'm going to put you in cuffs for the duration of our conversation for my safety. And it's like, all right, now you have a grown-ass man who's sitting there who just doesn't feel comfortable around cops. Now, because the cops are on the scene, now he's being put in cuffs, for something ultimately, that may be completely legal that he's doing. But because he's nervous, because, like, you get a guy who's 6'5", 300 pounds and looks like a bad guy in a fucking Chuck Norris movie, like, yeah, you have a cop show up that is the opposite of that. There's going to be a concern, and I would say, tactically speaking, rightfully so. It's like, yeah, this dude decides to put you in his fucking glove box and drive away. You might not be able to stop him. So you might need to invest a little bit more in controlling the scene, controlling the safety of everybody involved. But now you're compounding the issue, and it could very well be an issue that was started for, completely unnecessarily, and that's, I would say, my point. So again, it speaks to full circle the value of these videos. I would say that, and I made this point to somebody a couple of days ago. We have this mechanism in society with social media where these influencers get to determine what is cool, for lack of a better word. How do we get the likes? How do we get the shares? How do people get that placation or those dopamine hits from strangers that social media is training society to do? Like, well, these people are actually making it cool to get these videos in front of more and more eyes. Like, I can't stop fucking watching them. There's a couple of guys. My favorite one right now, my two favorite, remember I gave those types, right? You have the auditor type class of content creator, and then you have the observer, the person who either gets information or footage sent to them, or they assess other audits, I guess. My favorite of the first type is a guy, the Long Island Audit. To me, he's running the master formula on doing these audits effectively. He is extremely articulate. His temperament is just incredible. If there is literally a point where, if my future dealings with law enforcement, traffic stops or whatever the case is, I will mimic what I think Long Island Auditor, Sean Paul Reyes is his name. I'm watching enough videos, right? I know his name. I will actually mimic the way that he conducts himself, because he is the calmest, most even-energied individual doing this out of everybody I've seen. And it's so valuable, at least from my perspective, because I look at these and you could see the contrast. It's like, because what will happen is, and again, it doesn't mean that this means anything, but worth mentioning, when you have one of these auditor types that is exacerbating these situations, sir, can I have ID? Go fuck yourself, officer. It's like when you get that guy doing, acting like that, even though it may be completely legal, you're going to have people that are just not going to want to hear the message. They're not going to want to see what this guy is trying to prove because they just can't relate to acting that way, right? Well, one of the things the Long Island Audit guy does so effectively is he puts on full display. It's like, you can't say that, oh, well, if you weren't being an asshole, the cops wouldn't have acted like that. This guy's never an asshole. This guy never raises his voice. This guy never uses profanity. This guy is saying, ma'am, sir, thank you, please. He is completely sticking to his mission. He doesn't make any concessions, but he actually shows, even if you did everything correctly, even if you were polite, even if you kept your voice where it should have been, even if you kept your hands to yourself, even if you backed away when somebody was looking to get in your face, even if you did all those things, it still goes south. That's the value, I think, of the formula he's running. So at that first level, I think he is, the most effective person that I've seen. At the second level, the observer level, there is a channel called Audit the Audit. And there's Audit the Audit, and the Civil Rights Lawyer, I think is the other one. Both of these are valuable because they're not in the moment. They're now looking and assessing the video, which affords them the ability to actually connect what's happening to case law, right? They could actually say, and one of them is actually an attorney. The other one might be an attorney too, but no, I actually think in his disclaimer, it says he's not an attorney, but whatever it is, they do a very good job at connecting the infractions or the accused infractions that are occurring in the video to case law. Like, the cop can't do this. This is why. And it's very educational in that sense. So I think, again, there's value, and those particular content creators are the ones that I enjoy watching the most. I actually reached out to, I emailed the Long Island Audit individual to do an interview. I think the chance of me getting him on is probably slim, just because the scope of where he is on YouTube compared to what I invested in YouTube. But again, a lot of it is I want him to be able to articulate, why he's doing what he's doing and what he perceives the value to be. And now the fact that these guys make money, which I guess something that you have to say, like, I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck. Like, I'd rather him make money than Kim Kardashian, and all these other people that are getting just as many viral, eyes on their content, who are doing nothing but advocating and incentivizing degeneracy and the erosion of what, the U.S. Collective morality happens to be. Like, yeah, let him make money. Let him make all the money so he has even more influence, because those are the types of people that are actually going to better the people that are observing their content, right? Officer Involved writes, beyond that, we citizens are ultimately responsible for what laws get passed and what laws get dissolved through voting. The Constitution does a lot to curb socialistic concepts, but only so far. Well, I've said before on past videos, destroying America, there's a legal way to destroy America. And I think it's very much overlapped to what you just shared there. Remember what that point I said about, laws being the codified morality of the people. There's the old story that's attributed to, I think, the Ben Franklin, that after the Constitutional Convention, a bunch of people asked him, well, what do we have? And he said, a republic, if we can keep it. And that if we can keep it part is important because, there's not going to, you cannot legislate morality, right? You could codify the interpretation of a given morality, but you cannot create a law that's going to make somebody good. You're not going to create a law that's going to drive somebody to being moral. And I think that's the dangerous game we play. But I don't think there's necessarily any way around it because it's like you want to create a safe society. Okay, just put everybody in pods, put everybody in the matrix pods, right? Everybody's safe. Put everybody in a jail cell. Everybody's safe. Like, there are ways to do that, but that's not what we're talking about. That content creator, the civil rights attorney or the civil rights lawyer, whatever his name is, he plays the banjo at the end of his videos. He has a great saying. His tagline is, freedom is dangerous, deal with it. And it's like just as succinctly put as anybody could do it, because that is what's at stake here. We're not trying to make everybody safe. We're trying to make everybody free and productive. If everybody participates in this together, we'll actually have some shit going on. We'll have some stuff to do. People are much less likely to get into trouble when they got some productive outlets for what it is that they're doing effort-wise. I think when you look at, the correlation of crime and unemployment, it kind of makes sense. Less people got shit going on. It's more time for them to display offset up to and including, illegal behavior. So I completely agree with the sentiment that, laws are only going to do so much. There is a certain point, like, think if we had the more destructive-minded individuals putting their representatives into the Supreme Court. And you look at some of the offset between the Supreme Court's outcomes or takes on these certain cases, and some of them are so polar opposite, you realize it's just a matter of preference. It's what side gets their guys in, because there's clearly no objective, overview or participation at that level, even the Supreme Court's level, because some of these, these takes on these cases that some of these justices have, it's like, what are you doing? You're not being objective at all. And this is the game we play, right? Because we're fallible people, and we're never going to reduce or eliminate that people element of these things working, right? Jamie says, meanwhile, they're all being recorded by cameras whose footage can be obtained as matters of public record. Such a great point. That's, and the guy, Long Island Audit, makes this point from time to time with people. He's like, usually in police stations where he's recording legally in publicly accessible areas, and some sort of a supervisor boss will come over and, giving him a hard time. And, oh, we're doing it for safety. And he'll point out, he's like, well, there's a camera right there that, I could just fill out a Freedom of Information Act or open records request, whichever it is, to get that footage of this, of this interaction. And that should be the irony of it all. But I would say one of the other things that, the bad acting officer knows is that some of that content could be redacted, some of that content, or we could just slow down the wheels of process, and it'll be 6 months before he gets it. And, they do have some influence over that. So again, it's about losing power much more so than it is ever about what it is they're saying it is. It's for the safety of our officers. Like, I don't understand what that means. Like officers, like if somebody walks in and just wants to act nefariously, there's no mechanisms or means by which officers can stop people from recording. Especially with today's technology, it's like it's a losing game. It's a moot point. You're not going to stop somebody from recording if they want to record. And on top of that, who is the person that's a threat? Is it really the person that's standing in your lobby with 2 cameras, speaking, calmly and answering everybody's questions? Like it's usually a power struggle, right? And I will say on top of that, speaking about, police officers, there's a certain point where, we cannot ignore the fact that these are human beings, right? I grant that. I teach people, I coach people, I get paid good money, very appreciated money, levels of money, to help individuals strengthen their mindset, right? And when it applies to their effectiveness in their lives, their approach to business and whatnot. Like, so I have a level of expertise in creating robust anti-fragile mindsets. That being said, every once in a while, I'm in a bad fucking mood, right? So even I make absolutely no, promises that I've solved the human problem, to where I am always in a great mood, and like, no. So it would be insincere or disingenuous for me to somehow place an expectation on a law officer to always be in a great mood. That being said, to the bad officers at large, like, motherfucker, you're at work. The amount of officers you see in a lot of these videos who take these interactions personally is disgusting. I would say too, on top, which makes it even more disgusting, is that to a certain extent it's expected. One of the questions that I wanted to ask the Long Island audit guy, because I want to operate under the assumption that not every interaction he has is on video. He might say, nope, everyone I do gets a video, and I don't know. But I'm operating under the assumption that some of the things just go so well, they're so uneventful, that he doesn't even make a video. But what I wanted to ask him is, what's the percentage? All the police officers, he's been all around the country. This motherfucker's even been in Hawaii. Like, what is the percentage of either law enforcement and government employees? What's the percentage that respects your rights? What's the percentage of people that become emotionally connected to you not being able to exercise your rights? Like, I want to know that number. I don't know what it is. I'd be interested, because I think one of the things that people operate under, and again, and I have to say this carefully because I don't want it to be misinterpreted, but one of the things that a lot of people operate under is most cops are good, and it's just a few bad apples. And I would say that I disagree with that. I think that when we look at the criteria of what an officer's job should be and what his temperament should be while doing it, I think the overwhelming majority of cops are not doing a good job, and therefore should not be considered to be good cops. Now, it doesn't mean that these people are pieces of shit and that these agencies should be defunded. What I'm saying is, I think what we're getting is the best that they can do given the situation at the scale of number of police officers in the country. Given the climate in which they are operating, we're getting probably better than could be expected. But I don't think it's enough. And again, it's one of those things where I understand that these jobs are difficult. I understand, like I don't have the temperament to be a police officer. I admit that. I don't have a temperament to be an auditor either. There's a certain point where I'm like, yep, this guy needs to get punched in the face. And it could be on either end of that equation. Like, I don't belong in those situations. Therefore, I avoid those interactions because I understand, because I want to be a functional member of society. But again, one of the things that I got to witness, growing up in New York City, is the cultural change amongst the NYPD. From the time I was young to up to as recently and now. At some point, and there's a whole bunch of factors involved in this that I can get into, but I wouldn't say they're very relevant. But I would say, in a general sense, this went from being a culture, I would say almost a tribe, those people who are in law enforcement, to a good city job. And the level of commitment to what it meant to be an actor of high standard in that position has completely been thrown by the wayside. One of the things that I observed a couple of years ago, and I don't know when this happened with NYPD, and I'm not going to go much longer, but I observed the relaxation of the grooming standards. Like, I go now and I see cops with pink hair and beards and 5 o'clock shadow, and it's just like, as somebody who's written a book on tribal dynamics, it's like, having, or allowing and affording individual officers to express their individuality is not going to help you when it comes to leveraging the officer's willingness or desire to be a part of the tribe when it comes to actually training them to become more effective at doing it. Let me say that another way. If you at some point say, okay, all of the officers in my department need to have more training and need to improve the temperament that they are displaying to the public, the more individualized these officers consider themselves to be, the harder a job I'm going to have by making them commit to making these changes. So you are getting in your own way from a leadership standpoint when you are encouraging the leadership because of morale purposes. Now, again, somebody could say, well, it's easy for you to say, you don't have enough fucking people on your law enforcement force, and people don't want to be a cop. Like, you got to make some concessions. I get it. And I would say, regrettably, I don't have a fucking answer for you. But what I do know is the context of the dilemma that you're in does not absolve you of the accountability of not doing your job at an effective level. When I look at cops who are losing their shit, they're losing their temper. I get in bad moods like anybody else, but they should have the discipline that allows them to either recuse themselves from the situation, or they should be able to put on the facade of professionalism to get them through this, stressful encounter. But the standard should be, what is them at their best and how close are they to it every single shift that they work? It is not, I have to, like you have the sentiment, well, I gotta get home at night. I gotta make it home. Like, I get it. But motherfucker, you're at work. You signed up for this shit. You decided not to be a fucking pizza guy, not to be an Uber driver, not to be a fucking Con Ed linesman. It's like, you're a fucking cop. You wear a gun in a city. When shit's going sideways, everybody's running away. You're running toward it. So there is, and again, like, I acknowledge that all of that could be addressed. All of that could be followed, and there still be a level of offset in the communities in which they work, where it's damn near dysfunctional in what they could do. And all I would advise, right, if I was in a consulting position in one of these agencies, these law enforcement agencies, when trying to decide how to more effectively navigate the ability to police these unruly communities or filled with people who are completely opposed to their presence, I would say, number one, everybody would follow the same rules as far as the officers are concerned. Like, everybody would learn how to de-escalate, over-escalate. Even if the guy is saying your mother's a whore, even if the guy is doing everything in his power to antagonize you, you have to understand de-escalating in certain situations is just the better call, right? It's the more effective way to be. I saw a video not too long ago with a traffic stop. And this guy looked like the boogeyman. Is a black dude, face tattoos and all this stuff. You guys may have seen this video. You can go look it up. And I saw these police officers pull him over, and they were putting him through the fucking ringer. Why? Because I know they just cannot conceive of the fact that this guy did not have anything illegal on him, that there wasn't a warrant. Like, this guy's, he looks like a bad guy. And this guy was super respectful. He was a lot more respectful than I would have been. And he just sat there and took it. And they're speaking to him like he's a piece of shit. And they're treating him like a piece of shit. Guy didn't do anything wrong. Like, literally didn't do anything wrong. I was just curious. You're coming from this gym at this odd hour, and pulled him over. And the first thing the cop says is, I just noticed you were going a little bit under the speed limit, driving in the middle lane. And the guy winds up like overlooking that, the actual guy who's in the car. But I'm sitting there going, wait, what? Now, I understand I'm watching it in the video, so obviously I'm a little bit more present than that guy may have been, given all the things that he was paying attention to. But this whole thing started with the cop saying, yeah, I pulled you over because I noticed you were driving a couple of miles an hour under the speed limit and in the middle lane. Like, what the fuck is wrong with that? But they saw this dude. They're like, this motherfucker's got to be part of something. And that's a problem, and that's a problem. And these officers that every once in a while you see them lose their jobs, over these things. Like, yeah, that's what happens. I had an incident at the jungle gym, and I'll end with this. Female officer was a student at the school, and we have contracts in my school. You sign up for a year, and you got to pay for a year, and there's a cancellation fee and whatnot. But like, you don't just say, yeah, fuck this contract at some point. It's not how I run business. And this lady wanted to do just that, wanted to get out of her contract, and she was a law enforcement officer, NYPD, and she started threatening everybody. She started saying, well, you guys don't know I'm a cop. I can make your life miserable. And I went into all these different things. And I called 911. And I was like, yeah, there's a female officer. She's a student here, and she's making everybody very nervous. She has a firearm on her. She's not brandishing it, but I noticed it in her waistband. And she's bringing up the fact that she's a police officer, and that's why we should be listening to her. And we're all very nervous. Like, literally 5 minutes. The boss car shows up, like 3 cars show up. One of the boss gets out, white shirt, walks in, tells her, fuck out here. They're doing one of these for 5 minutes, comes in, and who's the owner? And, my guys are like, him pointing at me. And he's like, are we good? I'm like, yeah, we're good. Just tell him not to come in again. We're good. He was like, thanks, and walked out. Like, these people need to be dealt with. Like, guy did a great job. Pretend I was one of these guys. Like looking back, did I do the right thing? Did I? And this is where the complications occur. But let me bring this full circle. I appreciate a lot of you guys are writing comments and stuff, but I got to end this. I think these auditors are doing a great service for people. They're making it cool to understand what our rights are. They're making it cool to watch tyrants get their comeuppance. They're spotlighting a lot of these tyrants in a way that these tyrants have never been spotlighted before. By my definition, and according to my book TRIBALNOMICS, a tyrant is an individual who disregards the validity of another's individuality. Meaning they only look at individuals as sort of reflections of what their use for them is. They don't assign any value to another's individual identity. A lot of these cops are just that. They are tyrannical. And the proof of that is the very, codified, trackable existence of another's identity is embedded in the rights that they each individually possess. And to disregard that is to disregard the individual. And that's as tyrannical as it gets. All right. So if any of you guys know Long Island Audit, reach out to him. Tell him he should do an interview with me. I think it'll be a good one. Guys, feel free to comment. There's always the live show comments, the chat box, but then there's the comments on the video itself. I'd appreciate to see your take on what your, maybe on discrepancies and what I've discussed so far, things you disagree with, because I think this is a very significant conversation everybody should be having. Juan, I appreciate you for getting on here and sharing your take. I'm sure there's a whole other side to it, and and I've been part of that, in training law enforcement over the last few decades. Like I understand the shit you guys go through, which is why I think it's so important to train the mindset to be as disciplined as a sort of samurai, on the job. Like you're there because of, and I'm not speaking to one, I'm speaking in general to law enforcement. You're there because society needs you there. And we need you on point. We need you as strong as you could possibly be. So there's an individual standard that needs to exist as a law enforcement officer that I think right now they're not being held to. And I would say the culture, in the agencies themselves could stand a little bit more of a commitment toward. All right. I appreciate you guys. It's been a great talk. I got a split. All the relevant links are in the description. I'm here every Wednesday. I'll see you next week. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.